everyone, and welcome to this week's video blog post from my perspective, taking theory to practice. So today we're going to talk about loose parts and infants. So this is the first video of a series that I'm creating all about loose parts. I'm going to go through all the different age categories and talk about some of the concerns that you guys have, answer questions, give you guys some strategies, lists of materials that you could bring in as well, and of course some more resources. Okay, so bringing loose parts into your infant program can be exciting, daunting, overwhelming for many educators, but there are so many benefits that outweigh all of the hesitations, objections, and those heightened nerves that can happen when you want to bring them in. Exploring these magical materials with infants can be very safe, and they also provide value to their play and your program. I asked you guys a question earlier this week. What is your biggest struggle with infants and loose parts? And as I went through all these wonderful questions that I got, I kind of realized that it kind of created like a how to bring loose parts into your infant programs. So today we're going to talk about the different safety aspects and how to plan for that. I'm going to give you many examples of ideas of materials that you can bring in. We're going to discuss the common types of play, such as like mouthing and dumping and ripping that you guys asked in your questions, and how to prepare the materials and plan for that type of play and why it happens. And then lastly, I'm going to showcase the value of these materials so that you can help communicate this to your fellow educators, admin, and parents as well. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so let's get to it here. So I got many awesome questions from you guys, and like I said before, it kind of turned into a how to bring loose parts into your infant program. So the first question came from Tracy, and she wanted to know about the safety aspects when it comes to bringing loose parts in. And so this is the first thing you need to consider, and there's three things that I look at with this. You want to look at your adult supervision. So when we are actively engaged with the children, we're not just observing and documenting and having conversations with them, we're also looking at that safety aspect as well and making sure that the children are not using them in an unsafe manner, especially with the infant age. I know sometimes I get asked a lot of times when it comes to fabrics, how to use fabrics with infants. And so my suggestion is obviously I'm actively engaged when I have fabrics out, because if they get it onto their face, it can be a bit of a safety hazard. So if I am not able to be actively engaged and I need to be like changing a diaper or anything like that, the fabric would be put away for that time, and the items that are left out for them to explore their own pace would be items that I don't have to worry about that with. So then I would bring the fabrics back out when I can be actively engaged with them as well. That's a quick example. So the next thing you want to look at is size. So there are like the specialty made choking cylinders or something that you can purchase from educational stores to see if items are too small. If they fit in, then they are too small. If you do not have that, then you can also use like a paper towel roll or toilet paper roll and see if it fits inside. If it fits in any way, it is not safe. So it needs to not fit in the roll. And the last thing you want to consider, because infants do mouth a lot of things, is you want to look at, is there any harmful substances that it's coated with or finished with? Because when they mouth it, those substances can come off and go into their systems, and that's not safe. Okay, so the next question came from Melissa, and she wanted to have a list of items that we could use in our infant programs. So I will list a few of my favorite items that I like to use with infants, but I also have quite a few materials listed in the special edition of one of my editions of my newsletter, All Things Early Years, and it's for loose parts for under 3s, and so there's a lot of different ideas in that issue that you can get, and you can download and subscribe to that. I'll have a link below and the show notes for that as well. So there's lots of ideas there. But Some of my favorite things that I like to use with infants, I think one of the favorite ones is mason jar lids, because there's so many different things that can happen. They are metal, so they'll make a noise when you bang them. And mason jar lids, like, they have the holes that you can put, they can usually put their arms inside so they can explore that. There's counting, they could bring them up to their face. Like, there's just so many different things that you could do with those ones. Another one that I really like to use is the colorful transparent scarves. If you don't have those, I've just used regular scarves as well, because they're filled with different patterns, beautiful colors, and sometimes you can even find ones that represent from different places around the world as well. Another one that I really like to use is, of course, cardboard boxes. Who doesn't like to play with a cardboard box? And infants would love to crawl in and out of them, maybe even on top of them if the box is sturdy enough. You can do so much with a cardboard box. Another item that I really, really like to use with with infants is water. And water is a loose part. So water is transformable, it can be manipulated, it can be transported, it is just magical all on its own. So water is a great one to use with infants as well. And then lastly, one of my other ones I would say is probably napkin rings. I have a little bit of obsession with napkin ring holders. So these turn out to be great stacking toys. There's lots of math that could be involved. It works on their fine motor skills. They're just magical items that you can find, and you can usually find them at reuse centers or like secondhand stores. You can ask parents, and they come in all different shapes and sizes and weights and colors and fabrics, and I found all sorts of different ones. I will post some pictures of some of my favorite napkin ring holders and some of these other items as well in the show notes, okay? Okay, so the next steps, we've looked at safety and we've gotten a few ideas of what materials we can bring in. So we've set them out in the environment, the children are playing with them, and here's 3 of the common things that I got in the questions. They mouth them, they dump them, and they rip them. Okay, so when I thought about this, what I did is I went back to the theory of loose parts. And within that, Nicholson, he talks about the right kind and number of variables. So I want to emphasize the right kind and number, okay? That's really important. So when it comes to mouthing, if you're finding that the infants are mouthing a lot of them and it's frustrating you, or you don't want them to go into their mouths, then you need to look at, is this the right kind of variable that I've brought into my program? Is it something that I can easily sanitize and wash? Now, with that being said as well, do you have the right number of variables? Because infants like to put everything in their mouth. So if you only have one mason jar lid or one juice lid and they all want to explore it, it's all going to go right into their mouths. So with that, you need to make sure you have the right number as well. Okay, so when it comes to ripping, all I like to do is rip stuff. Well, this is where I would look again at, do I have the right kind of variable? So if they are wanting to explore ripping, do I have recyclable materials that they can rip instead? Should I put paper out? Because this is all part of the different types of variables that you can bring into your environment. So to try to tie this in, we all know that infants need really rich sensory environments. So these loose parts, they bring in so much sensory stimulation for these infants. And in the very first blog post that I did, the video one, I talked about the types of play and the connections to loose parts with that. And so this brought into mind about the ripping and the dumping and the mouthing. It kind of, I think it relates to the exploratory play that I talked about in that series, and how children are using their senses to explore objects, and they're trying to figure out the properties and see what they can do with them. So that is very much what these children are doing. They're just exploring a type of play that they naturally do. So you want to go back and say, do I have the right kind and number of variables for this type of play that the infants are going to explore. We know that they're going to put things in their mouths. We know that they're going to dump stuff. So we need to plan for that and be prepared in our environments for it. So when we have the right kind of materials, that really goes a long way. And then also us having the mindset that we know this is going to happen. Okay, so the next question came from Sandra, and she wanted to know how to have other educators respect the value of loose parts. Now, I really believe that this answer is just tied in with what I talked about, and how the more that we understand the types of play that infants engage in, and then making sure we have the right kind of materials in our environments, and then we're able to speak about it better, that will go a long ways in showcasing the value of these loose parts, because we'll be able to communicate the value as well. And then it also changes how we document and how we plan, and that also brings more value to these items as well, because we're able to communicate that. Okay, so another question came from Diana, and this one's a little bit more specific. So I guess they have a light table, and she wanted to know what items that they could put on the table for them to explore. And I guess she also mentioned how sometimes they knock it off, and then the younger infants get to explore them and mouth them as well. So again, this mouthing is a part of their play. It's something that we need to plan for, and we need to make sure we have the right variables. Okay, so for light table with infants, first of all, I would say just remember the items do not have to be transparent to put them on a light table. So if you have those beautiful, colorful, transparent items, that's wonderful. They're exploring all of those different colors, how it looks. But when you start to put other items, such as like the juice lids or tin cans or scarves or tree branches onto the light table, they're gonna start to see how light affects these items. And then two, when they start to take an item on and off the table, they're gonna start to see how it changes, and it goes into that cause and effect, which is a really big part of infants and their play. Okay, so lastly here, Leslie wanted to know about cleanup and keeping organized. So yes, I would say that's a pretty big one. So again, I'm gonna go back to that whole point of the theory of loose parts and making sure that you have the right kind and number of variables. So as I said before, if you only put out a couple items, if they're all into exploring a mason jar lid and you only have two and they're all going to want to put it into their mouths, that's probably not the greatest idea. So you need to make sure you have, I would say, one for each child, if not more. And then make sure you have a variety of materials. So when it comes to keeping organized with it and what needs to go and get cleaned and what doesn't, I would suggest having an extra bin besides the one that you put out with the materials for the children to explore. So I would have an extra bin, and I would even use a not available sticker for that bin, and the children will eventually learn that when something goes in there, they are not able to use the item. So when a child has finished exploring it and mouthing it and they've dropped it on the floor and they've kind of gone off, you can quickly pick it up, put it into that bin, and then you can say it's not available anymore, it's all done. And they will eventually learn that once the item goes in there, it needs to be cleaned and all of those things and sanitized. So this is where you want to make sure that you have plenty of mason jar lids or milk caps or whatever you're using that they are able to explore, but then you're also able to stay organized with your cleanup as well. So I also do a little bit of talking about organization with loose parts in the 10 tips for your learning environment guide that I have on my website as well. And so I give you some tips on storage through indoors and outdoors in that guide, and you can easily download that on my website as well. I'll put a link in the show notes for it too, okay?
Thank you so much for watching this episode on loose parts and infants. Make sure to subscribe, and if you liked this video, give it a like and share. Don't forget to check out all the resources listed in the show notes, and I will see you next week for our second video in this loose parts series on loose parts and toddlers. Have fun playing.